It started with 3 men in tuxedos who weren't there for the champagne. What followed would expose a billion-dollar conspiracy, shatter the illusions of high society, and reveal that the quiet single father flipping steaks in the kitchen was anything but ordinary. One split-second decision at an elegant charity gala set off a chain reaction that reached criminal syndicates, corporate empires, and the hearts of an entire city. And it all began with danger, courage, and an unexpected partnership forged in chaos. The soft clinking of crystal glasses mixed with classical piano. The Grand Belmont Hotel ballroom sparkled under cascading chandeliers, filled with the city's elite in designer gowns and tailored suits. But in the kitchen below, one man worked in silence, his past hidden beneath a chef's coat. Little did anyone know, 3 uninvited guests had just walked through the door. And the collision between violence and virtue was about to change everything. The night a chef became a guardian and a CEO discovered what real strength looked like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scent of seared duck breast and rosemary filled the kitchen of Aurelian, one of the most prestigious restaurants in Ashford Heights. The evening rush had begun, and the heat from the industrial stoves turned the space into a carefully controlled inferno. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under bright lights, and the rhythmic sound of knives against cutting boards created a symphony of precision. Jeremy Walters stood at his station, his focus absolute. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent years perfecting his craft. His hands, scarred from burns and blade slips, worked the pan with practiced ease. A drizzle of burgundy reduction, a delicate placement of microgreens, and the dish was complete. He slid it across the pass with a quiet nod. Behind him, the kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos. Sous chefs barked orders. Line cooks hustled between stations. The expeditor called out table numbers with mechanical urgency. But Jeremy remained an island of calm, his expression neutral, his movements deliberate. He was 38 years old, tall and lean, with close-cropped dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples. His eyes were a deep brown, quiet but alert, the kind of eyes that noticed everything without seeming to look. He wore the standard chef whites, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and ink. A faded tattoo of a compass rose marked his left wrist, a remnant of a life he no longer spoke about. Jeremy Walters was not someone who drew attention. He preferred it that way. In a world of ego-driven chefs who screamed and threw pans, he was the opposite, respectful, steady, reliable, the kind of man who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained. But there was more to Jeremy than the kitchen knew. Before the aprons and the Michelin stars, before the quiet life in Ashford Heights, he had been someone else entirely. A ghost in foreign deserts, a shadow in hostile territories, a man trained to extract, eliminate, and disappear without a trace. He had left that world behind 8 years ago when his wife Natalie passed away from an unexpected illness, leaving him alone with their 7-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was everything to Jeremy now. The reason he woke up every morning. The reason he traded the chaos of covert operations for the chaos of a commercial kitchen. He had chosen this life deliberately. Cooking was methodical, creative, and most importantly, it kept him present. It kept him home. Tonight, Ethan was staying with Mrs. Keegan, their elderly neighbor who treated the boy like her own grandson. She lived 2 doors down in their modest apartment building on Crescent Lane, a quiet street lined with oak trees and street lamps that flickered just before dawn. It was not a wealthy neighborhood, but it was safe. It was theirs. Jeremy checked the clock. 7:15. He had 3 more hours on his shift, then he would pick up Ethan, tuck him in, and read another chapter of the adventure book they had been working through together. It was routine. It was peace. The kitchen door swung open, and the head chef, a burly man named Anton Rousseau, stepped through with a clipboard in hand. His face was flushed from the heat and the stress of the evening service. "Walters," Anton called out, his French accent thick and clipped. "I need you on the gala tomorrow night." Jeremy paused mid-motion, his knife hovering over a sprig of thyme. "The charity event?" "Yes, the Grand Belmont. High profile. Very high profile. We are catering the entire affair. I need my best people, and you are one of them." Jeremy hesitated. He rarely took outside gigs. They disrupted his schedule, and more importantly, they disrupted Ethan's routine. But Anton was staring at him with that look, the one that said this was not a request. "What time?" Jeremy asked. "Setup starts at 4. Service begins at 7. You will be stationed at the carving table. Simple, elegant, no complications." Jeremy nodded slowly. "I will see if Mrs. Keegan can watch Ethan for the evening." Anton clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. This event is important. The owner of Castellan Industries is hosting. Big money. Big names. We make a good impression, and Aurelian gets more bookings like this." Jeremy returned to his station, his mind already shifting gears. He did not care about big money or big names. But he cared about keeping his job, and he cared about providing for his son. So he would go. He would do what he always did. Show up, do the work. Go home. That night, after his shift ended and the kitchen had been scrubbed clean, Jeremy walked the 12 blocks back to his apartment. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the occasional car passed by with a soft hiss of tires on asphalt. He stopped at a corner store and picked up a carton of milk and a box of cereal. Ethan had been asking for the kind with the cartoon tiger on it, and Jeremy was not one to deny him small joys. When he arrived home, Mrs. Keegan was waiting in the hallway, her wrinkled face lit up with a warm smile. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair pinned into a neat bun and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "He was an angel," she said, handing Jeremy a folded piece of paper. "He drew this for you." Jeremy unfolded the paper. It was a crayon drawing of the two of them standing side by side. He was wearing his chef hat, and Ethan had drawn himself holding a spatula. Above them, in wobbly letters, it read, "Best chef dad ever." Jeremy felt something tighten in his chest. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Keegan." "Anytime, dear. You know I love that boy." Inside the apartment, Ethan was asleep on the couch, still in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching a stuffed elephant named Peanut. Jeremy knelt beside him and gently brushed the hair from his forehead. The boy stirred but did not wake. Carefully, Jeremy lifted him and carried him to his bedroom, tucking him under the blankets. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, watching his son sleep. The rise and fall of his small chest, the peaceful expression on his face. This was what mattered. This was the mission now. Jeremy stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, the wealthy elite were preparing for their charity gala. They would sip champagne and make donations and feel good about themselves. And Jeremy would be there, behind the scenes, doing what he always did. Staying invisible, but something gnawed at the edge of his awareness. A faint instinct honed over years of survival in hostile environments. It was the kind of feeling that used to keep him alive. The kind that whispered, "Something is coming." He shook it off. That life was behind him. He was just a chef now. Just a father. Nothing more. He closed the curtain and walked back to the kitchen to prep Ethan's lunch for school the next day. Turkey sandwich. Apple slices. A juice box, simple, normal, safe, but deep down, in a place he tried not to visit, Jerry Walters knew that safety was always an illusion. And tomorrow night, at the Grand Belmont Hotel, That illusion would shatter. The Grand Belmont Hotel stood like a monument to wealth and power in the heart of Ashford Heights. Its facade was all marble columns and gold trim, with a grand staircase leading up to towering glass doors that reflected the city skyline. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, depositing guests in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Photographers clustered near the entrance, cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, the ballroom was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling painted with Baroque frescoes. Round tables draped in ivory linen surrounded a polished dance floor, each centerpiece a cascade of white orchids and gold-dusted branches. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music drifting through the hum of conversation and laughter. This was the annual Castellan Foundation Gala, a charity event that raised millions for various causes while serving as a showcase for the city's elite. Politicians, business moguls, socialites, and celebrities mingled under the soft glow of ambient lighting, their smiles practiced and their handshakes firm. At the center of it all was Julia Patterson, the 34-year-old CEO of Castellan Industries, a multinational corporation specializing in sustainable technology and infrastructure. She stood near the stage, radiant in a floor-length emerald gown that caught the light with every movement. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, and diamond earrings glinted against her pale skin. She looked every bit the polished executive, confident and composed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but beneath the surface, Julia was exhausted. The past 6 months had been a relentless battle. Her company was in the middle of a hostile takeover attempt by a rival conglomerate led by a man named Victor Kane, a ruthless billionaire known for acquiring companies and gutting them for profit. Julia had refused every offer, every threat, every underhanded tactic. She had built Castellan Industries from the ground up after inheriting a failing company from her late father, and she would not let it fall into the hands of someone who cared nothing for its mission. Tonight was supposed to be a reprieve, a chance to remind herself why she fought so hard. The foundation her father had started supported education programs for underserved communities, and tonight's gala would fund scholarships for hundreds of young people. It was meaningful work. It mattered, but as Julia smiled and shook hands with donors, she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her head of security, a former federal agent named Allison Hughes, had insisted on doubling the security team for the event. Allison had received intel that Kane's people were escalating their tactics, moving from corporate espionage to something more dangerous. Julia had brushed it off. This was a charity gala. What could possibly happen here? Downstairs, in the sprawling kitchen complex beneath the ballroom, Jeremy Walters was in his element. The catering team had transformed the space into a precision operation. Dozens of chefs and servers moved in synchronized chaos, plating appetizers, checking orders, and coordinating with the event staff upstairs. Jeremy stood at the carving station, his knife gliding through a perfectly roasted prime rib. The meat was tender, the crust golden and fragrant with garlic and herbs. He worked with the same quiet focus he brought to everything, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a younger chef named Parker wiped sweat from his brow. "Man, I have never seen a crowd this fancy. You ever work an event like this before?" Jeremy shook his head. "First time. You nervous?" "No," Parker laughed. "Of course not. You are like a robot, dude. Nothing rattles you." Jeremy said nothing. He plated another slice of beef, arranged it with roasted vegetables, and passed it to a server. The truth was, he had been in far more stressful situations than this. A ballroom full of millionaires was nothing compared to a desert compound filled with armed hostiles. But that was not something he talked about. Not anymore. Upstairs, the evening continued without incident. Guests enjoyed their meals, speeches were made, and checks were written. Julia took the stage to thank the attendees, her voice clear and confident as she spoke about the importance of education and opportunity. The crowd applauded warmly, but as she stepped down from the stage and moved toward her table, she noticed something odd. 3 men in tuxedos stood near the back entrance, their posture too rigid, their eyes too focused. They were not mingling. They were not eating. They were watching. And they were watching her. Julia's pulse quickened. She glanced toward Allison, who was stationed near the main doors. Allison had noticed them too. She spoke quietly into her wrist communicator, her expression tense. The 3 men began to move. Not quickly, but deliberately. They split up, each taking a different path through the crowd, converging toward Julia's position. Julia's breath caught. This was not paranoia. This was real. Allison moved swiftly, intercepting one of the men. "Sir, I need to see your credentials." The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I am a guest." "Then you will have no problem showing me your invitation." The man's hand moved toward his jacket. Everything happened at once. Allison shouted. The man pulled a weapon. Screams erupted from the crowd. The other 2 men moved toward Julia, their hands reaching beneath their jackets, and in the kitchen below, Jeremy Walters heard the unmistakable sound of panic. He froze, his knife still in hand, every instinct suddenly awake. He knew that sound. He had heard it 100 times before in 100 different places. It was the sound of violence about to unfold, without thinking. Jeremy dropped the knife and ran. The kitchen door burst open. And Jeremy sprinted into the service corridor, his heart pounding but his mind razor sharp. Years of training had conditioned him to move toward danger, not away from it. The sounds of chaos grew louder as he climbed the back staircase. 2 steps at a time, he emerged into a side hallway adjacent to the ballroom. Through the open double doors, he could see the scene unfolding in horrifying clarity. Guests were scrambling away from the center of the room, overturning chairs and knocking over champagne flutes in their panic. Security personnel were shouting, trying to establish control. And there, near the stage, 3 men in tuxedos had surrounded a woman in an emerald gown. Julia Patterson. Even from a distance, Jeremy could see the terror in her eyes. Though she stood her ground, refusing to cower, one of the men had drawn a weapon, a compact pistol fitted with a suppressor. The other 2 were closing in, blocking any escape route. Allison Hughes was on the ground, clutching her arm where she had been struck during the initial confrontation. Blood seeped between her fingers. Time seemed to slow. Jeremy's tactical mind assessed the situation in microseconds. 3 armed hostiles. 1 primary target. Dozens of civilians in the line of fire. Limited cover. No backup. Every rational part of him screamed to stay hidden, to let trained security handle it, to think of Ethan waiting at home. But another part of him, the part that had been forged in fire and blood, knew that if he did nothing, Julia Patterson would die. And possibly many others. Jeremy moved. He stripped off his chef's coat as he ran, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. He grabbed a metal serving tray from a nearby table, testing its weight. Not ideal, but it would have to do. He entered the ballroom through a side entrance, staying low, using the panicked crowd as cover. The 3 men were so focused on Julia that they did not notice him approaching from their flank. The first man, the one with the gun, was speaking into a radio. Target acquired. Preparing for extraction. Jeremy closed the distance in 3 silent strides. He swung the serving tray with brutal precision, striking the man's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Before the man could react, Jeremy drove his elbow into the side of his head, dropping him instantly. The second man spun toward Jeremy, reaching for his own weapon. Jeremy did not give him the chance. He stepped inside the man's reach, trapped his arm, and delivered a devastating knee strike to the ribs. The man gasped, his breath exploding from his lungs. Jeremy followed with a palm strike to the chin, and the man crumpled. The third man was faster. He had his weapon out and was already raising it toward Jeremy. Time froze. Jeremy saw the barrel aligning with his chest. He saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger, and then Julia moved. She grabbed a champagne bottle from the nearest table and swung it with all her strength, striking the third man across the back of his head. The bottle shattered, and the man staggered forward, dazed. Jeremy did not hesitate. He closed the distance, disarmed the man with a practiced twist, and put him in a chokehold until his body went limp. Silence fell over the ballroom. 3 men lay unconscious on the floor. Jeremy stood over them, breathing hard, his hands still raised in a combat stance. Around him, the crowd stared in stunned disbelief. Julia Patterson stood a few feet away, her chest heaving, shards of glass glittering in her hair. She looked at Jeremy, her green eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition, not of his face, but of what he was. What he had been. Who are you? She whispered. Jeremy lowered his hands slowly. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Just a chef, ma'am. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Security personnel rushed forward, securing the 3 unconscious men. Paramedics attended to Allison, who was conscious and already barking orders despite her injury. Jeremy turned to leave, but Julia reached out and caught his arm. "Wait, please." He stopped, looking down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. She was trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "I do not even know your name. Jeremy Walters. Jeremy." She repeated it like she was committing it to memory. "Thank you." He nodded once, then gently pulled his arm free and walked toward the service corridor. The crowd parted for him, still silent, still staring. He disappeared through the doors and down the stairs, back into the kitchen where the catering staff stood frozen, eyes wide with questions. Anton Rousseau stepped forward, his face pale. "Jeremy, what just happened up there?" Jeremy picked up his chef's coat from where he had dropped it and pulled it back on. "There was a situation. It has been handled. But you just—" "I need to leave," Jeremy said quietly. "My son is waiting." Quietly. "My son is waiting." He walked out of the kitchen, through the service entrance, and into the cool night air. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. He leaned against the brick wall, closing his eyes, forcing his breathing to steady. He had promised himself he would never go back to that life. He had promised Natalie, in her final days, that he would be a father first, always. And yet, when the moment came, his body had moved on instinct. The training had taken over. The warrior had emerged from beneath the chef's whites. Jeremy pushed off the wall and started walking. He had 12 blocks to clear his head before he got home. 12 blocks to bury the past again and become just a father. Just a chef. Nothing more. But as he walked through the quiet streets of Ashford Heights, he knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. Because tomorrow Julia Patterson would come looking for him. And when she did, everything he had built, every wall he had carefully constructed, would come crashing down. Jeremy did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, his mind replaying the events at the gala on an endless loop. The weight of the serving tray in his hand, the look in Julia Patterson's eyes, the muscle memory that had taken over his body without permission. He had tried so hard to leave that version of himself behind. For 8 years he had been disciplined, controlled, separate from the man he used to be. But it had taken only seconds for that facade to crumble. One moment of crisis, and he had become the operative again. Efficient, lethal, necessary. At 6 in the morning, Ethan padded into the room, still groggy, his hair sticking up in every direction. He climbed onto the bed and curled into Jeremy's side. "Morning, Dad." Jeremy wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "Morning, buddy. Did you have fun at the fancy party?" Jeremy hesitated. "It was interesting. Did you make good food?" "I did." Ethan yawned. "Can we have pancakes today?" Jeremy smiled despite everything. "Absolutely." They spent the morning in their usual weekend rhythm. Pancakes with blueberries. Cartoons on the couch. A walk to the park where Ethan played on the swings while Jeremy sat on a bench, watching him with quiet vigilance. To anyone observing, they were just another father and son enjoying a Saturday morning. Normal, unremarkable. But Jeremy could not shake the feeling that something was coming. He had felt it before, that prickling awareness at the back of his neck. The sense that his world was about to shift in ways he could not control. At 2 in the afternoon. There was a knock on the door. Jeremy tensed. He told Ethan to stay in the living room and approached the door slowly, checking the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, but it was not Mrs. Keegan. It was Julia Patterson. She looked different than she had at the gala. She wore jeans, a simple cream blouse, and a navy blazer. Her hair was down, falling in loose waves past her shoulders. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more real. Jeremy opened the door, but did not step aside. "Miss Patterson, Jeremy." Her voice was soft but steady. "I am sorry to show up unannounced. I had to find you. How did you get this address?" "I have resources." She paused. "Can we talk?" Jeremy glanced back toward the living room where Ethan was engrossed in his show. "Not here. Then where?" He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. "We can talk out here. You have 5 minutes." Julia nodded, respecting the boundary. She folded her arms, not defensively, but as if she were trying to hold herself together. The men from last night, they were hired assassins. Professional, well-funded. They were sent to kill me. Jeremy's expression remained neutral. "Do you know who sent them?" "Victor Kane. He is trying to take over my company, and when I refused to sell, he decided to remove me permanently." Her voice wavered slightly. "The police are investigating, but Kane has layers of protection. He will deny everything, and his lawyers will bury any evidence. Then you need better security." "I have security," Julia said. "What I need is someone who understands how men like that think. Someone who can anticipate their next move." She met his eyes. "Someone like you." Jeremy shook his head. "I am a chef. What happened last night was instinct." "Nothing more, instinct?" Julia's voice sharpened. "You disarmed 3 trained killers in under 10 seconds. That is not instinct. That is training. Elite training." Jeremy said nothing. Julia took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I do not care who you used to be, Jeremy. I care that you saved my life, and I care that Kane is not going to stop. He will send more people. Better people. And next time, I might not be so lucky." "Hire a private security firm," Jeremy said flatly. "There are plenty of former operatives who specialize in executive protection. I do not trust them. I trust you. You do not even know me." "I know enough," Julia said quietly. "I know you did not hesitate. I know you put yourself in danger to protect a complete stranger. And I know that whatever life you have built here, you did it for a reason." Her eyes flicked toward the door behind him. "You have a son." Jeremy's jaw tightened. "Leave him out of this." "I am not threatening him," Julia said quickly. "I am saying I understand why you want to stay hidden. But Kane's people know who you are now. They saw what you did. And if they connect you to me, they will use that against both of us." Jeremy felt a cold weight settle in his chest. She was right. He had made himself visible. He had stepped into the light, and now the shadows knew where to find him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, Help me stop Kane, not as a bodyguard. As an advisor. Help me understand how people like him operate. Help me stay one step ahead. She paused. I will pay you. Whatever you need. I do not want your money. Then what do you want? Jeremy looked at her for a long moment. She was desperate, that much was clear. But there was something else in her eyes. Determination. Integrity. She reminded him of the officers he used to serve under. The ones who believed the mission was bigger than themselves. I want my son to be safe, Jeremy said quietly. That is all I have ever wanted. Julia nodded slowly. Then help me end this. Because if Kane wins, he will not stop with me. He will destroy everything in his path, including anyone who got in his way. She held his gaze. Including you. The door behind Jeremy opened slightly, and Ethan peeked out. Dad, who is that? Jeremy turned, his expression softening instantly. Just a friend from work, buddy. Go back inside. I will be there in a minute. Ethan looked at Julia curiously, then disappeared back into the apartment. Julia smiled faintly. He looks like you. Jeremy ignored the comment. If I agree to help, we do this my way. No media, no publicity. And you keep my name out of everything. Agreed. And when it is over, you walk away. No favors, no debts. Julia extended her hand. Deal. Jeremy stared at her hand for a moment, then shook it. Her grip was firm, confident. When she let go, she pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to him. My private number. Call me when you are ready to start. She turned and walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly. Jeremy watched her go, then looked down at the card in his hand. Simple, elegant, just her name and a phone number. He slipped it into his pocket and went back inside. Ethan was waiting on the couch, his curious eyes wide. Is she nice? Ethan asked. Jeremy sat down beside him. I think so. Are you going to help her? Jeremy looked at his son, at the innocence and trust in his face, and felt the weight of the choice he had just made. Yeah, buddy. I think I am. Because the truth was, Jeremy Walters had spent 8 years running from his past. And now, whether he liked it or not, the past had found him. And this time, he would not run. This time, he would stand and fight. Not for himself, but for the people who mattered. For Julia, for the city. And most of all, for Ethan. The quiet life was over. The war had begun. The following Monday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Jeremy had spent the entire Sunday wrestling with his decision. Watching Ethan play in the small patch of grass behind their apartment building. Wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or the only choice that made sense. He had called Julia that evening. His voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. They agreed to meet at her office downtown, away from public spaces, away from curious eyes. She had offered to send a car, but Jeremy refused. He would take the bus. He would stay invisible for as long as possible. Now, standing in front of the Castellan Tower, a gleaming 40-story monument to corporate success, Jeremy felt profoundly out of place. He wore his only pair of dress pants, a button-down shirt that was slightly too big, and shoes he had polished the night before. He looked like a man trying to fit into a world that was never meant for him. The lobby was all marble and glass, with abstract art installations that probably cost more than his annual salary. Security guards in crisp uniforms monitored every entrance. A receptionist with perfect makeup and a practiced smile directed him to the executive elevators. 40th floor, she said. Miss Patterson is expecting you. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another dimension. Soft music played overhead. The walls were mirrored, reflecting Jeremy's uncomfortable expression back at him a dozen times. He adjusted his collar and reminded himself why he was here. Not for Julia, not for himself. For Ethan, to end this threat before it reached his son. for Ethan to end this threat before it reached his son. The elevator doors opened into a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Ashford Heights, the city sprawling beneath them like a living map. A young assistant greeted him immediately. "Mr. Walters, please follow me." She led him through a corridor lined with photographs of infrastructure projects. Wind farms, solar arrays, sustainable housing developments. Whatever else Castellan Industries was, it appeared to be genuinely invested in making a difference. That mattered to Jeremy more than he wanted to admit. Julia's office was at the end of the hall, behind double doors made of frosted glass. The assistant knocked once and opened the door. Julia stood by the window, her back to him, phone pressed to her ear. She wore a charcoal suit with her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked every inch the CEO, commanding and composed. But when she turned and saw Jeremy, her expression softened immediately. "I will call you back," she said into the phone, then ended the call. "Jeremy, thank you for coming." He stepped inside, and the assistant closed the door behind him. The office was spacious but not ostentatious. A large desk dominated one side, covered with neat stacks of folders and a laptop. The other side had a sitting area with leather chairs and a low table. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on engineering, economics, and environmental science. "Please sit," Julia said, gesturing toward the chairs. Jeremy sat, his posture upright, his hands resting on his knees. Julia took the chair across from him, leaning forward slightly. "I know this must feel strange," she began. "Trust me, it feels strange for me too. I have spent my entire career solving problems with spreadsheets and strategy meetings. This is very different." "You are in over your head," Jeremy said bluntly. Julia blinked, then nodded. "Yes, I am. Kane is not going to stop because you outsmart him on paper. Men like him operate outside the rules. They use fear, violence, and money to get what they want. You cannot negotiate with that. Then what do I do?" "You expose him," Jeremy said. "You find evidence that connects him directly to the attack at the Gala. You make it public. You force the authorities to act." "I have been trying," Julia said, frustration creeping into her voice. "But Kane has insulated himself. The assassins were hired through shell companies. The money trail disappears into offshore accounts. My legal team says we do not have enough to make anything stick." Jeremy leaned back, thinking. "Then you need someone on the inside. Someone who can get close to Kane's operation and gather evidence you cannot access legally." Julia studied him carefully. "Are you offering?" "No," Jeremy said immediately. "I am a father first. I cannot take risks that would leave my son without a parent. But I can help you find the right people. Former intelligence operatives who specialize in this kind of work." Julia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the armrest. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jeremy hesitated, then nodded. "What did you do before you became a chef?" He had known this question was coming. He had rehearsed a dozen deflections, a dozen half-truths. But sitting here, looking into her eyes, he found he did not want to lie. "I was part of a special operations unit," he said quietly. "We handled extractions, intelligence gathering, high-value target elimination. I did that for 12 years. Why did you leave?" "My wife got sick. She needed me home. And when she passed, I realized I did not want that life anymore. I wanted to be present for my son. I wanted to build something instead of destroy things." Julia's expression softened with understanding. "And now I am asking you to go back." "You are asking me to risk everything I built," Jeremy said. "And I need you to understand what that means. If I help you, and Kane finds out, he will not just come after me. He will come after Ethan. He will use my son to get to me. That is how people like Kane operate. Then we make sure he never finds out, Julia said firmly. We keep you in the shadows. You advise me, but you stay anonymous. No public exposure. No trail. Jeremy shook his head. It is already too late for that. The people at the gala saw me. Kane's men saw me. My face is out there now. Then we protect you, Julia said. I will assign a security detail to watch your apartment. I will make sure Ethan is safe. I do not want armed guards following my son to school, Jeremy said, his voice hard. I do not want him growing up afraid. Then what do you want? Julia asked, her own frustration surfacing. Because I am trying to find a solution here, Jeremy. I am trying to keep both of us alive. Jeremy stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Somewhere down there, Ethan was in second grade, learning about fractions and drawing pictures of dinosaurs. He was safe. He was happy. And Jeremy was about to jeopardize all of that. I want a normal life for him, Jeremy said quietly. I want him to grow up without violence, without fear. I want him to believe the world is good. Julia stood and joined him at the window. I want that too. For all the families who depend on my company. For the communities we serve. She paused. But Kane does not care about any of that. He cares about power and profit. And if we do nothing, he wins. And when he wins, good people lose. Jeremy turned to look at her. You really believe this is about more than just your company? I know it is, Julia said. Kane has destroyed a dozen companies in the last 5 years. He guts them, sells off the assets, and leaves thousands of people unemployed. If he takes Castellan, he will dismantle every program my father built. The scholarships, the community initiatives, the sustainable projects. All of it gone. Jeremy saw the conviction in her eyes, the belief that this fight was worth the cost. It reminded him of why he had joined the service in the first place. Not for glory or adventure, but because some things were worth protecting. If I do this, Jeremy said slowly, we do it smart. We gather intelligence first. We identify Kane's vulnerabilities. And we only move when we have a clear advantage. Julia nodded. Agreed. And we keep Ethan out of it completely. He does not know what I am doing. He does not know who you are beyond someone I work with occasionally. Of course. Jeremy extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Julia shook his hand, her grip firm and grateful. Thank you, Jeremy. As he left the office and rode the elevator back down to street level, Jeremy felt the familiar weight of a mission settling onto his shoulders. He had walked away from this feeling once. He had buried it beneath aprons and recipes and bedtime stories. But now it was back, and there was no denying it. He was a warrior again. And this time, the battlefield was not some distant desert. It was here, in his city, in his life. And the stakes had never been higher. That evening, after picking up Ethan from school and making dinner and reading 3 chapters of their adventure book, Jeremy stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching him sleep. The nightlight cast a soft glow across Ethan's peaceful face. Jeremy made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, whatever dangers lay ahead, Ethan would be protected. Even if it cost Jeremy everything. Because that was what fathers did. They stood between their sons and the darkness. Always. The first threat arrived 3 days later in the form of a manila envelope slipped under Jeremy's apartment door. He found it early in the morning while Ethan was still asleep, his name typed across the front in plain block letters. No return address. No postmark. Jeremy's instincts flared immediately. He picked up the envelope carefully, noting its weight, checking for any irregularities. When he was satisfied it was not dangerous, he opened it. Inside were photographs. 6 of them, printed on glossy paper. Each one showed Jeremy in a different location over the past week. Leaving his apartment. Walking Ethan to school. Working in the kitchen at Aurelian. Entering the Castellan Tower. The message was clear. You are being watched. We know everything about you. The final photograph made his blood run cold. It showed Ethan on the playground at school, laughing on the swings, completely unaware of the camera capturing his image. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "Cute kid. Be ashamed if something happened." Jeremy's hands trembled with rage. He forced himself to breathe, to think tactically rather than emotionally. This was psychological warfare, designed to make him panic, to make him back away from Julia and whatever they were building together. But it had the opposite effect. Now this was personal. He called Julia immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Jeremy, what is wrong?" Kane made his move. He sent someone to photograph me and my son. This is a direct threat. There was a pause. "I am so sorry. I will increase security around your building." "No," Jeremy said firmly. "That will only confirm we are working together. We need to be smarter than that. Then what do you suggest?" Jeremy thought quickly. "I need to disappear for a few days. Take Ethan somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. Can you arrange that without leaving a trail?" "Yes. I have a property outside the city. A cabin in the Redstone Valley. It is private, off the grid. No one knows about it except my head of security." "Allison Hughes?" "Yes, she's the only person I trust completely." Jeremy made a decision. "Set it up. I will take Ethan there this afternoon. Tell the school he is sick. Tell Mrs. Keegan we are visiting family. What about your job?" "I will call Anton and take personal leave. He owes me enough favors that he will not ask questions. "Jeremy," Julia's voice softened. "I never wanted to put you in this position." "I know," Jeremy said. "But we are in it now. And the only way out is through." By noon, Jeremy had packed 2 bags. One for himself and one for Ethan. He told his son they were going on a surprise camping trip. And Ethan's excitement helped ease the guilt gnawing at Jeremy's conscience. Mrs. Keegan accepted the story about visiting Natalie's sister without suspicion. And Anton grumbled but approved the leave. Allison Hughes arrived in an unmarked sedan. Her arm still in a sling from the gala, but her expression all business. She was in her mid-40s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Walters," she said, extending her good hand. "I hear we are going off the grid for a bit." Jeremy shook her hand. "Appreciate the help. Julia trusts you. That is good enough for me." She glanced at Ethan, who was bouncing excitedly in the back seat. "He does not know?" "And he will not," Jeremy said quietly. "As far as he is concerned, this is just a fun trip." The drive to Redstone Valley took 2 hours, winding through forested hills and along narrow roads that saw little traffic. The cabin was exactly what Julia had described, remote, modest, surrounded by tall pines and completely invisible from the main road. It had solar panels on the roof, a well for water, and enough supplies to last a week. Allison did a full security sweep while Jeremy and Ethan explored. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living area with a stone fireplace. Ethan immediately claimed the bedroom with the bunk beds. "This is awesome, Dad," Ethan said, climbing to the top bunk. "Can we make s'mores tonight?" Jeremy smiled. "Absolutely." After Allison left, Jeremy spent the evening maintaining the illusion of normalcy. They roasted marshmallows over the fire. They told stories. They looked at the stars through the clear mountain air. And when Ethan finally fell asleep, Jeremy sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and his phone. He had 3 missed calls from Julia and a text. "Are you safe?" He replied, "Yes, we are secure." "What is the situation there?" Her response came immediately. "Kane is accelerating. My board received an anonymous dossier this morning with fabricated evidence suggesting I embezzled company funds. They are calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. Jeremy's jaw tightened. He is trying to remove you legally now. And it might work. If I lose the board's support, I lose control of the company. Do you have all eyes on the board? 3 solid votes. Maybe 4. I need 7 out of 12 to survive. Jeremy thought for a moment, then typed, then we need leverage. Something that makes Kane back off or exposes him before the vote happens. When is the vote scheduled? 5 days from now. That does not give us much time. I know. Jeremy stared at the screen, his mind racing through possibilities. Then he made a decision that would change everything. I am coming back to the city tomorrow, alone. Ethan stays here with security. Jeremy, that is too dangerous. Danger is what I am good at. Let me do what I do best. There was a long pause. Then, what are you planning? To get inside Kane's operation. To find the evidence we need to bury him. You said you would not take that kind of risk. I changed my mind. He threatened my son. Now it is personal. Another pause. Then, be careful. Always. Jeremy put the phone down and stared out at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, Victor Kane was moving his pieces across the board, confident he had already won. But Kane had made a critical mistake. He had threatened the one thing Jeremy would die to protect. And now, Jeremy Walters was going to war. The next morning, Jeremy woke Ethan early and explained that he had to go back to the city for work. But that Ethan got to stay at the cabin with a nice security guard named Sam who loved video games and knew how to fish. Ethan's face fell. You are leaving? Jeremy knelt down to his level. Just for a couple of days, buddy. And when I come back, we will have the whole weekend together. I promise. Do you have to go? Jeremy hugged him tightly. Yes, but I will call you every night before bed. Sam, a former police officer with a kind face and a patient demeanor, arrived shortly after. He immediately engaged Ethan in a conversation about the best fishing spots nearby. And within minutes, Ethan was smiling again. Jerry watched them for a moment, memorizing the image. Then he climbed into the car Allison had left for him and drove back toward Ashford Heights. Back toward danger. Back toward the man he used to be. Because Victor Kane had made this personal. And Jeremy Walters did not lose when things got personal. Jeremy returned to Ashford Heights under the cover of early morning darkness. The city was just beginning to wake, streetlights still glowing against the fading night. He parked the car in a public garage 3 blocks from his apartment and walked the rest of the way, his senses hyper-aware of every shadow, every movement. His apartment was exactly as he had left it, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap, a place where his enemies knew to find him. He moved through it quickly, gathering specific items from a locked box in the back of his closet. A prepaid phone, cash, a set of identity documents he had hoped never to use again, and something else wrapped carefully in oilcloth. A compact Glock 19 with 2 spare magazines. Jeremy stared at the weapon for a long moment. He had not touched a gun in 8 years. He had promised himself he never would again. But promises made in peacetime did not hold up in war. And this was war. He tucked the weapon into a concealed holster at the small of his back, pulled on a dark jacket, and left the apartment. He had work to do. His first stop was a shabby office building in the industrial district, the kind of place where people did business they did not want recorded. On the 3rd floor, in a room with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, he found the man he was looking for. Isaac Brennan was a ghost from Jeremy's past, a former intelligence analyst who had left the service under murky circumstances and now sold information to the highest bidder. He was in his 50s, balding, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. Well, Isaac said when Jeremy walked through the door. Jeremy Walters. I heard you were dead. Close enough, Jeremy said, closing the door behind him. I need information. Isaac leaned back in his chair, a thin smile on his lips. Information costs money. Jeremy pulled an envelope of cash from his jacket and tossed it on the desk. Victor Kane, I need everything you have on his security detail, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. Isaac opened the envelope, counted the bills, and nodded. Kane is careful. Very careful. But everyone has patterns. He turned to his computer and began typing. His primary residence is a penthouse in the Silverton district. 24-hour security. Cameras everywhere. You are not getting in there. Where else does he go? Isaac pulled up a file. He has a private office at Greystone Financial, his holding company. And he spends most Thursday evenings at an exclusive club called the Meridian. Very secretive. Very selective. Can you get me in? Isaac raised an eyebrow. Into the Meridian? That place has tighter security than the Federal Reserve. You would need an invitation, a background check, and a bank account with at least 8 figures. Jeremy leaned forward. I did not ask if it was easy. I asked if you could do it. Isaac studied him for a moment, then smiled. You have not changed, have you? Still charging straight into the fire. He turned back to his computer. I can get you a one-time access code. It will cost extra. Jeremy pulled out another envelope. How much extra? By midday, Jeremy had what he needed. An access code to the Meridian, a background legend that would hold up under basic scrutiny, and a detailed layout of the club's interior. He spent the afternoon preparing. Running through scenarios, memorizing exits, planning for contingencies. At 6 in the evening, he met Julia at a discreet location. A private room in a small art gallery that was closed to the public. She arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual composure fraying at the edges. The vote is in 3 days, she said without preamble. Kane's smear campaign is working. 2 board members who were on the fence are now leaning toward removing me. Then we do not have time to be subtle, Jeremy said. He laid out a blueprint of the Meridian on the table. Kane will be here tomorrow night. I am going in. Julia stared at the blueprint, then at him. Going in to do what? To get evidence. Financial records, communications, anything that ties him directly to the assassination attempt or his other illegal activities. That is breaking and entering. That is espionage. That is the only way to stop him, Jeremy said flatly. Your legal team cannot touch him because he has built walls around himself. But walls have cracks. And I know how to find them. Julia was quiet for a long moment. If you get caught, I cannot protect you. Kane will use it to destroy both of us. I will not get caught. You cannot promise that. Jeremy met her eyes. No, but I can promise I will do everything in my power to end this. For you, for my son, for everyone Kane has hurt. Julia looked down at the blueprint, her fingers tracing the layout. What do you need from me? A distraction. Can you arrange to be at a very public event tomorrow night? Something that draws media attention and keeps Kane's people focused on you? Julia thought for a moment. There is a fundraiser for the mayor's re-election campaign. High profile. Lots of press. High profile. Lots of press. Perfect. Be visible. Be confident. Make Kane think you are not worried. That will make him overconfident. Julia nodded slowly, then looked up at him. Jeremy, if something happens to you, what do I tell your son? The question hit him like a physical blow. He had been avoiding thinking about it, burying the possibility beneath layers of tactical planning. But Julia was right to ask. Ethan deserved better than wondering what happened to his father. Tell him I was trying to make the world safer, Jeremy said quietly. Tell him I loved him more than anything. And tell him to be brave. Julia's eyes glistened. I will not let it come to that. Neither will I, Jeremy said. But we both know the risks." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what was about to happen settling between them. Then Julia stepped forward and hugged him, quick and fierce. "Come back," she whispered. "I will," Jeremy promised. The next evening, Jeremy stood outside the Meridian dressed in a tailored suit he had rented that afternoon. The club was housed in a renovated historic building with no signage, just a discreet bronze plaque beside an unmarked door. 2 security guards in black suits flanked the entrance. Jeremy approached confidently, showing the access code on his phone. One guard scanned it, checked a tablet, and nodded. "Welcome, Mr. Ashford." Inside, the Meridian was everything he expected. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, soft jazz playing in the background. Men in expensive suits sat in private booths, conducting business in low voices. Waiters moved silently, delivering drinks and cigars. Jeremy moved through the space slowly, his eyes scanning for security cameras, exit routes, and most importantly, Victor Kane. He found him in a private room on the 2nd floor, visible through a gap in the curtains. Kane was in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, with the cold charisma of a man accustomed to power. He sat at a table with 3 other men, discussing something with intense focus. Jeremy positioned himself nearby, pretending to read a newspaper while actually listening to their conversation through a small earpiece connected to a directional microphone he had concealed in his jacket. "The vote is secured," Kane was saying. "Patterson will be out by Friday, and the board will accept my be-out offer by Monday." "And the complications from the gala?" one of the other men asked. Kane waved dismissively. "Handled. The chef who interfered has been identified and is being monitored. If he becomes a problem, we will deal with him." Jeremy's jaw tightened. So Kane knew who he was. The threat was real. What about the evidence? Another man asked. "If Patterson finds anything that connects you to the attempt on her life." "She will not," Kane said confidently. "Everything is insulated. Shell companies, offshore accounts, hired intermediaries. There is no paper trail." But Jeremy noticed something. When Kane said that last part, his hand unconsciously moved to the briefcase beside his chair. A tell, a subtle indication that Kane was not as confident as he pretended to be. The briefcase. That was where the evidence was. Jeremy stood and moved toward the restroom, passing close to Kane's room. As he did, he memorized every detail. The lock on the door, the position of the security cameras, the timing of the guard rotations. He would need to move fast. One chance. And if he failed, Ethan would grow up without a father. But Jeremy Walters had never failed a mission. And he was not about to start now. Jeremy waited 40 minutes before making his move. 40 minutes of calculated patience, watching the patterns of the security guards, timing the rotation of their rounds, noting when the waitstaff entered and exited the private rooms. He nursed a single glass of whiskey at the bar, looking for all the world like just another wealthy patron enjoying a quiet evening. At exactly 9:32. The guard stationed outside Kane's private room stepped away to escort another guest to a different section of the club. Jeremy had 30 seconds, maybe 40 if he was lucky. He moved with purposeful calm, crossing the 2nd floor hallway as if he belonged there. He reached Kane's door and tested the handle. Locked, as expected. But these were not high-security locks, just standard privacy mechanisms designed to keep out curious guests. Not trained operatives. Jeremy pulled a thin tension wrench and pick from his jacket pocket. Tools he had carried since his return to the city. The lock yielded in 8 seconds. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him. The room was empty. Kane and his associates had moved to the main dining area for dinner, leaving the briefcase unattended on a side table. Jeremy approached it carefully, checking for any security measures. No biometric locks, no alarms that he could detect. Kane's arrogance had made him sloppy. Jeremy opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, USB drives, and a laptop. He pulled out his phone and began photographing everything, working with mechanical efficiency. Financial transfers, email exchanges, contracts with shell companies, and most damning of all, a signed authorization for payment to a security firm with known ties to contract killers. It was everything Julia needed. Everything that would connect Kane directly to the assassination attempt, and a dozen other illegal activities. Jeremy was halfway through photographing the documents when he heard voices in the hallway. Kane was returning early. Jeremy's mind shifted instantly into combat mode. He had three options: hide and hope Kane did not check the briefcase, attempt to exit through the window, or confront Kane directly. None were ideal. He chose confrontation. Jeremy pocketed his phone, closed the briefcase, and positioned himself behind the door. When Kane entered the room with two of his associates, Jeremy stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. Kane froze, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows what you did," Jeremy said calmly. "And someone who's going to make sure everyone else knows too." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You are the chef. The one from the gala." He smiled, but it was a predator's smile. "You should have stayed in your kitchen." "Probably," Jeremy agreed. "But I have never been good at minding my own business." Kane gestured subtly to his associates, and they moved to flank Jeremy, blocking his exit. Both men were large, trained, dangerous. Jeremy assessed them in a glance. Private security. Former law enforcement maybe. Competent but not elite. "You made a mistake coming here," Kane said. "Breaking into a private club, stealing confidential documents. That is a felony. I could have you arrested." "You could," Jeremy said. "But then you would have to explain what is in those documents. And I do not think you want that conversation happening in a courtroom." Kane's expression darkened. "You think you are clever, but you have no idea what you are dealing with. I own half the judges in this city. I own the police commissioner. You are nothing but a small-time operative playing hero." "Maybe," Jeremy said. "But I already sent copies of everything to 3 different locations. If anything happens to me, they go public." It was a bluff. Jeremy had not had time to send anything. But Kane did not know that. Kane studied him for a long moment, then laughed. "You are lying. But I admire the attempt." He nodded to his associates. "Remove him quietly." The 2 men moved simultaneously. Jeremy had been expecting it. He sidestepped the first man's grab, drove his elbow into the second man's solar plexus, and swept his leg. The second man went down hard, gasping for air. The first man recovered quickly, throwing a heavy punch toward Jeremy's head. Jeremy blocked it, countered with a precise strike to the throat, and followed with a knee to the ribs. The man staggered back, clutching his neck. Kane's expression shifted from amusement to alarm. He reached for something inside his jacket, but Jeremy closed the distance instantly, twisting Kane's arm behind his back and pinning him against the wall. "Call them off," Jeremy said quietly, his voice cold and controlled. "Or I break your arm." Kane gritted his teeth. "Stand down," he ordered his men. The 2 associates backed away, both breathing hard, both reassessing the situation. Jeremy released Kane but stayed close, ready to react if anyone moved. "You cannot win this," Kane said, straightening his jacket. "Even if you have evidence, I will bury it. I will bury you. And I will make sure your son grows up knowing his father died a criminal." Jeremy's expression did not change, but something lethal flickered behind his eyes. "You just made a mistake, Kane. You threatened my son. That means this stops being about business. Now it is personal." Before Kane could respond, the door burst open. 4 security guards rushed in, weapons drawn. Jeremy raised his hand slowly, his mind calculating odds and angles. 4 armed opponents in a confined space. Poor odds, even for him. But then something unexpected happened. A voice came from behind the guards, clear and commanding. "Lower your weapons, now." The guards hesitated, then parted. Allison Hughes stepped through, her badge held high, flanked by 6 federal agents in tactical gear. "Victor Kane," Allison said, her voice formal and precise. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent." Kane's face went pale. "You have no authority here." "Actually," Allison said, stepping forward with handcuffs, "the FBI has been investigating your operation for 6 months. And thanks to Mr. Walters here, we now have everything we need to put you away for a very long time. We need to put you away for a very long time." Jeremy stepped back as federal agents swarmed the room, securing Kane and his associates. Allison caught his eye and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. They had been coordinating all along. Julia had brought in federal authorities days ago, and Jeremy's infiltration had been the final piece they needed. Kane was led away in handcuffs, still protesting, still threatening. But his power was broken. The monster was in chains. Allison approached Jeremy as the room cleared. "That was reckless. It worked," Jeremy said. "Barely." She paused. "Julia wants to see you. She is at Castellan Tower." Jeremy nodded and left the club, walking out into the cool night air. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. He had been in combat dozens of times, but it never got easier. The fear was always there, buried beneath the training. He pulled out his phone and called the secure line to the cabin. Sam answered on the first ring. "Everything okay?" Jeremy asked. "All quiet here. Ethan caught 3 fish today. He is very proud." Jeremy smiled despite everything. "Tell him I will be there tomorrow. And tell him I am proud of him too. Will do." Jeremy ended the call and started walking toward Castellan Tower. The city felt different now. Lighter somehow. The shadow that had been hanging over them was lifting, but he knew this was not over. Kane's arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, testimonies, media scrutiny. Julia would have to rebuild trust with her board. Jeremy would have to explain to Ethan why they had to hide in a cabin for a week. But for now, for this moment, they had won. And that was enough. When Jeremy arrived at Castellan Tower, Julia was waiting in her office, standing by the window just as she had been the first time they met. But this time, when she turned, there were tears streaming down her face. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It is over," Jeremy said. Julia crossed the room and threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Jeremy held her for a moment, then gently pulled back. "I did what needed to be done. But this victory belongs to you. You did not back down. You did not give up. That is real strength." Julia wiped her eyes, laughing a little through the tears. "I could not have done it without you." "Yes," Jeremy said. "You could have. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you are." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. Then Julia spoke, her voice quiet but certain. "What happens now?" Jeremy thought about Ethan waiting at the cabin, about the quiet life he had built, about the restaurant where he belonged. "Now I go back to being a chef. I go back to being a father. I go back to normal." Julia nodded, understanding. "And if I need you again?" Jeremy smiled slightly. "Then you call. And I will be there." Because that was who Jeremy Walters was. Not a hero. Not a warrior. Just a man who showed up when people needed him. A man who protected those who could not protect themselves. A man who understood that sometimes the greatest strength was simply refusing to walk away. And as he left Castellan Tower and headed toward his car, Jeremy felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile piece of hiding from the past, but the solid piece of knowing he had done the right thing. The war was over, and he had won. The morning sun broke over Redstone Valley with golden light, filtering through the pine trees and casting long shadows across the cabin's front porch. Jeremy sat with a cup of coffee, watching Ethan skip stones across the small creek that ran behind the property. Sam had packed up his gear an hour earlier, giving Jeremy a firm handshake and a knowing look before driving back to the city. 14 skips, Ethan shouted, turning to his father with pure joy radiating from his face. Did you see that? Jeremy smiled, the tension of the past week finally melting from his shoulders. I saw it, buddy. New record. Ethan ran back to the porch, breathless and grinning. Can we stay here one more day, please? Jeremy pulled his son close, ruffling his hair. I wish we could, but we have to get back. You have school, and I have work. Will we come back sometime? Absolutely, Jeremy promised. Maybe this summer. We can fish, hike, make it a real adventure. Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back inside to pack his things, humming a tune Jeremy recognized from one of his favorite cartoons. Jeremy sat for a moment longer, breathing in the clean mountain air, grateful beyond words that his son was safe, happy, and completely unaware of how close they had come to disaster. His phone buzzed. A message from Julia. Board meeting in 1 hour. Wish me luck. Jeremy typed back, you do not need luck. You have truth on your side. That is stronger. Her response came quickly. Thank you. For everything. Jeremy pocketed his phone and went inside to help Ethan pack. They loaded the car, locked up the cabin, and began the drive back to Ashford Heights. Ethan fell asleep in the passenger seat within 20 minutes, his head resting against the window. Peanut the elephant tucked under his arm. Jeremy drove in comfortable silence, his mind already shifting back to the rhythms of normal life. He would need to check in with Anton, catch up on the restaurant schedule, make sure Mrs. Keegan had not worried too much. Small things. Normal things. The building blocks of the life he had chosen. By the time they reached the city, the sun was high and the streets were bustling with midday traffic. Jeremy pulled into their apartment complex, helped Ethan carry his bag upstairs, and was immediately greeted by Mrs. Keegan, who emerged from her apartment with a plate of fresh cookies. Oh, you are back, she exclaimed, handing the plate to Ethan. I missed you terribly. We went camping, Ethan announced proudly. I caught 3 fish and skipped a rock 14 times. Mrs. Keegan beamed. What an adventure. You will have to tell me all about it. As Ethan launched into an animated retelling, Jeremy caught Mrs. Keegan's eye. She gave him a questioning look, the kind that said she suspected there was more to the story than a simple camping trip. But she did not press. She never did. That was one of the reasons Jeremy trusted her. Inside the apartment, Jeremy unpacked while Ethan settled back into his room, arranging his stuffed animals and pulling out his school supplies. Everything was exactly as they had left it. Safe, familiar, home. Jeremy's phone rang. It was Julia. How did the meeting go? He asked. Her voice was bright, almost breathless. They voted unanimously to keep me as CEO. Kane's evidence was exposed as fabricated, and 3 board members who were working with him have resigned. Castellan Industries is secure. Jeremy felt genuine relief wash over him. That is incredible, Julia. Congratulations. There is more, she continued. The FBI has confirmed that Kane is facing federal charges on multiple counts. His assets are being frozen, and his entire empire is under investigation. He will not hurt anyone ever again. Good, Jeremy said simply. And Jeremy, Julia's voice softened. The board approved the funding for a new community initiative. We are creating a culinary training program for at-risk youth and veterans transitioning to civilian life. I want you to help me build it. Jeremy was quiet for a moment, surprised by the offer. "Julia, I appreciate that, but I am just a chef. I am not qualified to run a program like that." "You are exactly who should run it," Julia insisted. "You understand discipline, mentorship, and what it means to rebuild a life. These young people need someone like you. Someone who has been through fire and came out stronger." Jeremy walked to the window, looking out at the street below. He thought about his own journey, about how cooking had saved him after Natalie died, about how it had given him purpose and structure when everything else had fallen apart. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "Of course. Take your time. But Jeremy, this is not charity. This is a real partnership. You would have autonomy, resources, and the chance to make a lasting impact." After they hung up, Jeremy stood at the window for a long time, watching the city move below him. For 8 years, he had kept his world small and manageable. He had avoided attention, avoided responsibility beyond his immediate circle. But maybe Julia was right. Maybe it was time to do more than just survive. Maybe it was time to build something that mattered. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, Jeremy sat with Ethan on the couch, reading their adventure book. They were nearing the end, and the heroes were finally returning home after their long journey. Ethan looked up at his father with thoughtful eyes. "Dad, are you a hero?" Jeremy blinked, surprised by the question. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard Mrs. Keegan talking to her friend. She said you did something really brave. Something important." Jeremy chose his words carefully. "I helped someone who needed help. That does not make me a hero. It just makes me someone who cares." Ethan considered this. "But if you help people, does not that make you a hero?" Jeremy pulled his son close. "Real heroes are people who show up every day. People like teachers, doctors, firefighters. People who do good things even when no one is watching. That is what matters." Ethan nodded slowly. "I want to be like that when I grow up." Jeremy felt his throat tighten. "You already are, buddy. You already are. Already are, buddy. You already are." The following week, life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Jeremy returned to Aurelian, where Anton welcomed him back with a bear hug and a barrage of questions he politely deflected. The kitchen staff had heard rumors about the Gala incident, but Jeremy downplayed his involvement, steering conversations back to prep work and menu planning. But something had changed. Jeremy moved through his shifts with the same precision, but there was a lightness to him now, a sense of possibility that had not been there before. He caught himself smiling more, laughing at Parker's jokes, engaging with the younger chefs in ways he had always kept at a distance. On Thursday evening, Julia came to the restaurant. She sat at a corner table, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than Jeremy had ever seen her. He took his break and joined her, sliding into the booth across from her. "I have been thinking about your offer," Jeremy said. Julia set down her menu, giving him her full attention. "I want to do it," Jeremy continued. "But on one condition. Ethan comes first. Always. If there is ever a conflict between the program and my responsibilities as a father, he wins." Julia smiled. "I would not have it any other way." They shook hands across the table, and Jeremy felt the weight of a new chapter beginning. Not a return to his old life, but a step forward into something better. Something that honored both who he had been and who he was becoming. Over the next month, the culinary training program took shape. Julia secured a facility in a revitalized neighborhood, a former warehouse transformed into a state-of-the-art teaching kitchen. Jeremy worked with educators and social workers to design a curriculum that combined technical skills with mentorship and personal development. The first class of 12 students arrived on a rainy Monday morning. They were a mix of young people from difficult backgrounds and veterans struggling to find their footing in civilian life. They were guarded, uncertain, some clearly skeptical that this program would be any different from the others that had failed them before. Jeremy stood in front of them, his chef's coat clean and pressed, his expression calm but warm. "My name is Jeremy Walters," he began. "I am not going to tell you that cooking will solve all your problems. It will not. But I will tell you this. In this kitchen, you will learn discipline. You will learn patience. You will learn that even when things fall apart, you can create something beautiful." He paused, meeting each of their eyes. "I have been where some of you are. I have felt lost. I have felt like the world did not have a place for me. But I found my way. And if I can do it, so can you." One student, a young woman with tired eyes and paint-stained hands, raised her hand. "Why should we believe you?" Jeremy smiled slightly. "You should not. Not yet. But give me 6 weeks. Show up, do the work, and then decide if I am worth believing." That first day was rough. The students struggled with basic knife skills, burned their first attempts at simple dishes, and argued over who was responsible for various mistakes. But Jeremy was patient. He corrected without judgment. He demonstrated without condescension. And slowly, the students began to respond. By the end of the first month, something remarkable was happening. The students were arriving early and staying late. They were helping each other, sharing techniques, building something that looked a lot like community. And Jeremy was thriving in ways he had not expected. Teaching gave him purpose beyond survival. It reminded him that his experiences, both good and terrible, had value beyond himself. Julia visited often, sometimes observing from the back of the room, sometimes rolling up her sleeves and working alongside the students. She and Jeremy developed an easy partnership, built on mutual respect and shared vision. They were not romantic, not quite, but there was an intimacy between them that went beyond friendship. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable, and that created a bond that could not be easily broken. One evening, after the students had left and the kitchen was clean, Julia and Jeremy sat on the loading dock, watching the sun set over the city. "You were right about this," Jeremy said quietly. "About building something that matters." Julia smiled. "We were both right. You brought the heart. I brought the structure. Together we made something real." They sat in comfortable silence, the city humming around them, the future stretching out with possibility instead of fear. And for the first time in 8 years, Jeremy Walters felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months later, the Grand Belmont Hotel hosted another charity gala. But this time the atmosphere was entirely different. The ballroom sparkled under the same crystal chandeliers, but tonight the cause was education and opportunity. The Castellan Foundation, in partnership with community organizations across the city, was celebrating the graduation of its first culinary training program, Cohort. Jeremy stood near the kitchen entrance, watching the graduates mingle with donors and community leaders. They wore crisp chef's whites, their faces glowing with pride and accomplishment. 3 of them had already secured positions at respected restaurants. 2 were opening a catering business together. The rest had job interviews lined up or were continuing their education. Ethan, now 8 years old and growing taller every day, stood beside his father wearing a miniature chef's coat that Julia had commissioned specially for him. He had insisted on being part of the event, claiming he was his father's official assistant. "Dad, look," Ethan whispered, pointing toward the stage. "Miss Julia is about to speak." Julia approached the podium, radiant in a midnight blue gown, her confidence and grace evident in every movement. The room quieted as she began to speak. 6 months ago, we launched a program built on a simple belief that everyone deserves a second chance. That talent and determination exist in places we often overlook. That with the right support, people can transform their lives. She paused, her eyes finding Jeremy in the crowd. But we could not have done this without someone who understood that truth in his bones. Someone who proved that courage is not about grand gestures, but about showing up every day and doing the hard work of building something meaningful. She gestured toward Jeremy. Jeremy Walters taught me that real strength is not about power or wealth. It is about standing up when it matters, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and believing that change is possible even when the odds seem impossible. The room erupted in applause. Jeremy felt his face flush, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the recognition of what they had all accomplished together after the speeches. As guests enjoyed dinner and the string quartet played softly, Julia found Jeremy near the dessert table where Ethan was carefully selecting 3 different pastries. "Just one, buddy," Jeremy said gently. "But they all look so good," Ethan protested. Julia laughed. "How about this? You pick one now, and I will make sure you get the other 2 wrapped up to take home." Ethan's face lit up. "Really, you are the best, Miss Julia." As Ethan returned to his careful deliberation, Julia turned to Jeremy. "The board approved expansion funding. We are going to open 3 more training centers across the state." Jeremy nodded slowly. "That is incredible. And I want you to oversee all of them. Director of Culinary Education and Community Development. Full salary, benefits, and most importantly, a schedule that lets you be present for Ethan." Jeremy looked at her, seeing not just the CEO but the woman who had walked into his life during a moment of crisis and somehow become part of his family. "You know I am not corporate material." "Good," Julia said. "Because I do not need corporate. I need someone real. Someone the students trust. Someone who leads by example." Before Jeremy could respond, one of the graduates approached. A young veteran named Marcus who had struggled with PTSD and unemployment before joining the program. "Chef Walters, I just wanted to say thank you. This program saved my life. I mean that literally." Jeremy shook his hand. "You saved your own life, Marcus. You showed up. You did the work. I just provided the kitchen." Marcus smiled. "Maybe, but you also provided hope. And sometimes that is all someone needs to keep going." After Marcus walked away, Julia turned to Jeremy. "That is why this matters. That is why I need you to say yes." Jeremy watched Ethan, who had finally settled on a chocolate eclair and was now showing it to Mrs. Keegan, who had been invited as Jeremy's guest. He thought about the life he had built, the walls he had carefully constructed to keep the world at a safe distance. And he thought about how those walls had come down, not through force, but through connection, through purpose, through allowing himself to believe that his past did not have to define his future. "Okay," Jeremy said finally. "I am in." Julia's smile was radiant. "Thank you." As the evening continued, Jeremy found himself surrounded by people whose lives had intersected with his in unexpected ways. Allison Hughes, now promoted within the FBI, stopped by to tell him that Cain's trial had resulted in a 40-year sentence. Anton Rousseau offered him a standing invitation to consult on Aurelian's menu anytime he wanted. Even some of the guests from the original Gala approached to thank him for his bravery that night. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the evening. Ethan tugged on Jeremy's sleeve, his eyes serious. "Dad, are you happy?" Jeremy knelt down to his son's level. "Yes, buddy. I really am." "Good," Ethan said. "Because you smile more now. And I like it when you smile. Now. And I like it when you smile." Jeremy pulled his son into a hug, feeling the weight of 8 years of grief and fear finally lifting. He had spent so long protecting Ethan from the darkness of the world that he had forgotten to show him the light. But now, standing in this ballroom surrounded by people who had found second chances and new beginnings, Jeremy understood that the best protection he could offer his son was not isolation, but example. Example of courage. Example of kindness. Example of showing up even when it was hard. As the gala wound down and guests began to leave, Jeremy walked Ethan and Mrs. Keegan to the exit. Julia caught up with them, pressing the promised pastries into Ethan's hands. "Thank you for sharing your dad with us," she said to Ethan. Ethan grinned. "He is pretty great, is not he?" "The greatest," Julia agreed, her eyes meeting Jeremy's with warmth and understanding. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Jeremy lifted Ethan onto his shoulders as they walked toward the parking garage. Mrs. Keegan chatting happily beside them about the wonderful food and elegant decorations out above them. The stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light against the darkening sky. Jeremy thought about that night 6 months ago when violence had erupted in this very building, when he had made a split-second decision that changed everything. He had thought he was saving Julia's life, but the truth was, she had saved his too. She had reminded him that hiding from the world was not the same as healing from it. That purpose and connection were not luxuries but necessities. That the skills he had developed in war could be transformed into tools for peace. "Dad," Ethan said from his perch on Jeremy's shoulders, "can we come back here sometime?" Jeremy smiled. "Absolutely, buddy. Anytime you want." Because the Grand Belmont Hotel was no longer a place of trauma. It was a place of transformation. A place where endings became beginnings. A place where a chef discovered he could be more than he thought possible. And as Jeremy drove home through the quiet streets of Ashford Heights, his son dozing in the passenger seat and the city lights twinkling around them, he felt something he had not felt since before Natalie died. Hope, not the fragile hope of wishing things would get better, but the solid hope of knowing he had the strength to make them better. One day at a time. One person at a time. One act of courage at a time. The war was over. The mission was complete. And the life that lay ahead was brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.